Good morning, students. Today we'll be studying about the first chapter of class 7th English Literature, which is a poem, The Road Not Taken, a very famous poem by Robert Frost. Before starting the poem, let's study about the poet Robert Frost. Robert Frost was an American poet who later on shifted in England. It is in England where he was recognized for his writing. He started his literary career by writing poems when he used to be free after working in farm and teaching in school. He used to work in farm and teach in a school. When he got free time, he used to write poems. His why his poems are very famous is the speciality of his poem was it was related to life of every human being. It is said that our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, was inspired by him. Now, let's talk about the poem, The Road Not Taken. First, we'll talk about why this title. The Road Not Taken. In this particular title, the road symbolizes our life. The poet says that the path that we don't choose in our life is the road not taken. Try to understand this title. The road not taken means we are talking about the path which we did not choose. You'll understand about this title later on when I'll explain you all the meaning of all the stanza. So let's see the first stanza. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveller long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. So the first line says, two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Diverged means separated. Yellow wood. Wood represents forest. Why yellow? A forest with green dry leaves, which is usually seen in autumn season. In autumn season, the leaves dry and fall. So this yellow wood represents a forest with dry leaves. So this poem starts with two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. The poem begins with the speaker recounting the experience of facing the choice of which road to take. The poet is recalling he was walking through a forest when all of a sudden he came to a junction, a place where the road got diverged, diverged or separated into two. Now he is in dilemma. Dilemma means a situation where he is confused. He is not able to make choice which route to take. So he realizes that he is confused. He stood there and he's confused which option to take, which route to take. So the poet says, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. The second line, he realizes that he's feeling sorry. He realizes that as a traveler, traveling both road was of course impossible. Since he was all alone, he cannot travel on both the roads. Sorry. And be one traveler long. So what he did, he stood there. He stood there for a long time. He is standing there and he is making up his mind to which route to take. So he stood there and looked down one as far as I could. And what he did, he stood there and looked on to one road as far as he could. So he stood there and he tried to see the road as far as he could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Now undergrowth here means very dense growth of plant and bushes. The poet stood there and looked at the path very carefully as far as he could see it. Before taking the path, he wanted to know how it was. He wanted to know whether it was suitable for him or not. So he stood there and he looked at that path very carefully. Now, how this stanza, how this situation in poet's life is related to everyone's life. The yellow wood, it represents a world which is full of people, where people have been living for many years. So the poet is trying to say, the important message that the poet wants to give is that we'll find various situations in our life where we will have two options and we'll have to make a choice. At that particular time, what path to take, what choice to make is very, very important. Why? Because it is going to impact your future. The choice you will make will impact your future. If we'll make a wrong choice, we'll regret it and we cannot go back on it. So we must be wise while making choices. The poet, so poet is walking through a forest. He came to a situation where the road he was walking on got diverged into two. So he relates that to situation in everyone's life. You'll find a situation in life. Is best example is as a in the student's life. After completing your high school or intermediate, you will have to choose a single stream. You will have to make options whether you want to go for a medical field or you want to go in engineering field. You have to make a choice. So at that point, you have to carefully choose it. You have to make a you have to carefully observe and make a correct choice, because if you make a wrong choice, you will regret it. It will impact your future. Now, let's this was all about the second stanza. Let's talk about the second one. Now, the second stanza says, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that passing there had warned them really about the same. Now, let's understand that. Then took the other as just as fair. Fair here means as good as the other one. And having perhaps the better claim. Claim means better option. Now, the poet kept on looking at one path. He kept on looking at one path for a long time to check what? If it was right path for him or not. And then finally he decided, and having perhaps the better claim. And he decided that out of the two routes he decided one, and he chose the better option according to him. And having perhaps the better claim, he chose a path, and he decided and started working on another path, because he felt that both paths were equally good. Now, next line says, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. He says just as fair in the very first line. He says just as fair. He means that, so he feels that both paths were equally good, and he started working on one of them. He chooses the path which was less used, it had grass on it. The third line says, because it was grassy and wanted wear. He chose that path, it was grassy. This shows that that path was less used. If you use any path regularly, you will not find any grass there. The grass usually dries up. But the path he chose was full of grasses, so that shows that it was very less traveled by. The word here, the phrase here, wanted wear means it was unused. So because it was grassy and wanted wear means it was unused. Though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. Not many had walked on that path, that is why it was grassy. So after he walked on the path for some distance, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. What does that line means? After he walked on the path for some distance, he realized that both the paths had been worn out the same way. Means he realized after walking on that path, he realized that both the paths were almost same. Both the paths were similar and worn out. Now, how it is, what message the poet wants to give through this incident, through this stanza? In our life, if we take any path or option, but all of them have the same benefit, whatever path we take, whether it is like we talked about an example of students life, you took medical field, you took engineering, whatever field you'll take, you'll have you'll realize later on that they have the same benefits, same disadvantages, same problems, and same challenges, and of course we face them. So this is what the poet means by the second stanza. Let's move to the third stanza. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. Trodden, trodden, the second line, trodden black. Trodden means walked over. Now, and both that morning equally lay. The poet says that both the paths were similar that morning. And by this line, he means that both the paths were similar that morning. In leaves, no step had trodden black. Both had leaves on them. Leaves were fallen. In the very first stanza, we saw that it was autumn season. So leaves fell, and it was clear that no one had stepped on them as they were still green in color. No leaves, the poet says in the second line, in leaves no step had trodden black. Trodden black here means walked over. It looked like the leaves were still green, which showed that no one had stepped on them. We are talking about both the paths were similar. Now, oh, I kept the first for another day. He decided that that particular day he would take one path and will keep the other path for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. The last two lines of the stanza says, the third line of stanza says, the poet decides that that particular day he will take one path and keep the other path for another day. Although he knew that one way leads on to the another way. Try to understand these last two lines. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. He knew that he could not go back on the choice that he had made. He knew that if he'll take one path, he cannot come back and change his decision. So whatever decision he has to make it carefully, wisely. What message this stanza gives? In our life, it is quite similar. Once we choose an option, we must keep on moving ahead with that option, and we never get a chance to come back and take the other option that we have left earlier. So this third stanza says, in our life, once we choose an option, we must keep on moving ahead. We must keep on moving ahead with that option, and we'll never get a chance to come back. And we cannot come back and take the other option we had left earlier. So the decision which we have to the making the choice of the option should be very wise. Let's move to the next stanza. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, stanza 4. The sigh here, the first line of the last stanza. Sigh means very deep breath. Hence, in the next line, hence, somewhere ages and ages, hence here actually means future. What does the poet mean? I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. He says that in future, he will take a deep breath and say that once upon a time, he had reached such a point in life that there were two options for him. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by. He says that in future he will take a deep breath and say that once upon a time he had reached such a point in life that there were two options for him, and he took that road which had been travelled upon by lesser number of people. The last line says, and that has made all the difference. This last two lines says that it is not, the poet chose the path which was less traveled by. It is not always that the path which is taken by less people is always dangerous. So he's telling that how it is related to a life. In future, when you grow up, then you will say that once upon a time you were young, you had two options. The choice now, you had two options. You can opt for medical field or you can go for engineering. The choice that you made at that time made you what you became of it. Whatever you will be in future will be because of that choice which you made in that past, the decision which you took. This is a very strong message for all the students, that you should be very wise and careful while making choices out of the options that you have in your life, because your future depends on the choice that you make. Write down the question answers and try to understand this poem properly. Till then, take care, stay blessed. Thank you.